Good afternoon. It's Wednesday, November 26th. I'm Laura Cornfield, and this is IBA News broadcasting from Jerusalem. We open with the fierce weather conditions and the winter storm that has been raging since Monday. Today, it reached its peak, causing havoc in most parts of the country. Many highways and intersections were closed due to the heavy flooding, but no major power outages have been reported. Heavy winds and hail have hit the country, and there have been flash floods in the desert. IBA's Ariel Sullivan braved the storm.
The winter is well upon us, but this storm has already peaked and will peter out by the weekend. Most of the heavy downfalls came along the coastal plain and the Jerusalem mountains. Torrential rains are sweeping across the country. In the Gush Dan region, about 40% of their annual average rainfall has fallen in the past few days. In Jerusalem, it's cold, it's wet, it's windy. But the good news is that the Sea of Galilee has risen by nearly 4 centimeters in the past day.
Most of the rain was in the central regions, here in Bet Dagan where I work, and also in Tel Aviv, in the inner lowlands. For example, in Negba, in the northern Negev, we had over 100 millimeters for the past 24 hours. Here in Bet Dagan, we had over 80 millimeters, and in Jerusalem, over 50, almost 60 millimeters of rain were measured in the last 24 hours.
Now, people are seeing a lot of the rivers overflowing, and they're wondering, this is so much water. How much of the annual rainfall is it now?
Well, this is a good news because we are over 50% in some stations and over 40% of the annual rainfall in most stations.
Well, you're a weather forecaster. You think this is a sign of a very wet winter coming?
I can't say if it's a sign. A weather forecaster, we usually look at 3 and 5 days ahead and not the whole season. But we did issue an annual forecast for the season from the Meteorological Service, and that forecast was that there is 75% of either an average winter or above the average amount of rainfall for this winter.
That's good. Well, what's the prospects for the next day or so?
The next day will still be rainy. We'll see a little bit less thunderstorms, but still a lot of rain from the north to the northern Negev. Also in the night tomorrow, and the rain will subside only on Friday morning.
In Jerusalem, the heavy rains kept folks away from the Western Wall. The rain caused flash floods in the Judean desert, like this one in the Og River. The waters are filling up the Dead Sea, the lowest part of the country. At the nation's highest peak, snow fell, but not enough to open the ski season. That will have to come with the next storm. Ariel Sullivan for IBA News.
Wide-scale protests, violence, and looting are continuing in the United States in reaction to the grand jury decision not to indict white police officer Darren Wilson after the shooting death of a black teen, Michael Brown, in Ferguson, Missouri. Reporter Alexandra Jen has been following develops. Alexandra, what's the latest?
Well, Laura, things are actually getting worse. Just a short time ago, 2 FBI agents were shot near Ferguson, although their injuries are not life-threatening. It's now been 2 days since the decision, but the U.S. Justice Department still questions whether police officer Darren Wilson violated Michael Brown's civil rights. The decision not to indict Wilson sparked rioting in Ferguson, and now there is ongoing violence across the U.S. Take a look. Violent rioting has erupted in cities all across America because of the grand jury decision not to indict white police officer Darren Wilson over the shooting and death of black teen Michael Brown. Protesters scream for justice in the controversial case that highlights the racial divide still present in the states. Demonstrations escalated in New York City, where protesters took to the iconic Times Square holding banners and signs in support of Brown. Protesters even blocked the entrance to the Lincoln Tunnel connecting New Jersey and Manhattan. In Oakland, California, rioters broke the windows of local businesses. They started fires and blocked traffic, forcing the police to arrest 43 of the protesters. In a press conference, President Obama pleaded with the protesters to avoid more violence.
We are a nation built on the rule of law. And so we need to accept that this decision was the grand jury's to make. There are Americans who agree with it, and there are Americans who are deeply disappointed, even angry. It's an understandable reaction.
Police officer Darren Wilson is more than relieved by the decision not to indict him. In an exclusive interview with ABC's George Stephanopoulos, Darren Wilson gives his version of the encounter.
I said, "Hey, come here for a minute." And that's when he turned and said, "What the are you going to do about it?" and slammed my door shut on me. Slammed the door shut? Yes. I used my door to try and push him back and yell at him to get back. And again, he just pushed the door shut and just stares at me. And as I look back at him, all of a sudden, punches start flying.
He threw the first punch?
Yes. He threw the first one and hit me in the left side of my face.
Because, you know, some of the witnesses have said that they saw you trying to pull him into the car.
That would be against every training ever taught to any law enforcement officer. I don't know what or how many hit me after that. I just know there was a barrage of swinging and grabbing and pulling for about 10 seconds.
And in Ferguson, Missouri, although troops from the National Guard joined the police force to prevent looting and more violence from the demonstrators, the rioting did significantly calm down from the days prior. We hope to see more answers from the ongoing investigation that will hopefully bring an end to the violent rioting. Alexandra Jen for IBA News.
Back here at home, Justice Minister Tzipi Livni has postponed a committee debate on a controversial piece of legislation for the second time in the last week, delaying discussion of the so-called Zoabi Bail. Livni filed an appeal because the decision to bring the bill to a Knesset vote was made by the coalition leadership and not in the Ministerial Committee for Legislation, which she chairs. As a result of this appeal, the Knesset plenum discussion of the bill, named for ballot MK Hanin Zoabi, has been postponed. A cross-section of MKs want to bar Zoabi from the Knesset for having expressed pro-Hamas views and for saying that the Arabs who killed the 3 Israeli teenagers last June were not terrorists. IBA's political correspondent Eli Walgelanter spoke with Zoabi today and asked the ballot MK whether she thought this bill was specifically targeting her.
I think even if it is now against me, it will soon turn to be against any other MK who challenge the Zionist consensus, who is challenging the policy of the coalition. So even if it started to be as a personal law, it will not end as a personal law. It destroys the logic of election. It destroys the logic of freedom of expression. And they turn the Knesset, a parliament, they turn the parliament into a jury system. And they turn the MKs, which they are politicians. In the definition of their function, they are politicians. You cannot trust politicians to judge their colleague, to judge other politicians whom we know that there are a contradiction between their political views. I know that Bibi uses this as in his primaries, in his internal election inside the Likud. I know that he wants to say, I am the only master here who decide the rules of the game and I can't change the rules of the game. And he wants to win more popularity within the very racist mainstream inside the Likud. He knows that there is now a competition between Netanyahu and Figlin. But this is a disaster for even the margins of democracy, which remains. Because even till now, we are aware as Palestinians and as really left-wing politicians and as Palestinians that Israel never was a democracy, because we know the contradiction between the state being a Jewish state and being a democratic state. But what is now Bibi saying by 2 laws, Zoabi law and Israel as a national the nation, the laws of the Israel as a nation, the Jewish law, he is saying, okay, I admit that there is a contradiction between being a Jewish state and a democratic state, and I want to solve this contradiction in favor of the Jewishness of the state. So we always said it. In my party, National Democratic Assembly, we said it, that there is a contradiction, and they always answer us, no, there is no contradiction. We can have a balance between the 2 aspects. Now they admit it. They cannot balance. They must decide who is in favor for the other, and their answer was, their solution was that the Jewishness of the state has a priority upon the democracy of the state, and whenever there is a contradiction between the 2, we choose the Jewish of the state. So this law is an indication of a racist atmosphere which become a basic law of the game here inside Israel.
Where do you draw the line between freedom of speech and going too far? Where's the line?
Actually, it is not the question here. It is not the question. There is a law, and I am standing still for my struggle, the struggle for justice, the struggle for democracy, the struggle for equality. I know that the victim here are the Palestinians, and I know that the atmosphere of violence is created by the government of Israel. And I know that you cannot create an environment of violence and suddenly ask why such things happen and why I cannot preserve the status quo. For me, the status quo is a status quo of justice.
But isn't there a line? I mean, would you agree
That's
that...
it.
The bill defining Israel as the nation state of the Jewish people has created a storm that refuses to die down. Next week, the bill will come up for a preliminary vote in the Knesset. But in the meantime, the fallout from the bill has drawn the attention of President Ruben Rivlin and has impacted Israel's cultural scene. IBA's Margot Dudkevich has this report.
The controversial Basic Law Bill defining Israel the nation state of the Jewish people continues to generate waves. If approved, it threatens to tear apart the coalition government, create public outcry and alienate Israel's minority groups. The bill approved by the Cabinet Sunday at Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's initiative is set to come up for a preliminary vote in the Knesset next week. Former and current legislators and members of the public say the bill contradicts the liberal values of human rights and discriminates against Israeli citizens and the equality of minorities living in the country.
This law is anti-democratic and could be used for legitimizing racism and discrimination against Palestinian citizens of Israel. It's a basic law it's not only it's dangerous as it is, but it also could be used to have new laws derived from this law.
This law that defines Israel as a democratic and Jewish state will be another tool in the hand of the Supreme Court when it comes to examining a specific law.
We in Israel Democracy Institute see this bill as real problematic in the fact that it changes the balance between Israel as a democracy and Israel as a Jewish state. And yes, it will have implications on the issue of equality for minorities. It's not merely a symbolic bill.
What this is doing is not only crushing the basics of the democracy of the states of Israel, it's crushing the Jewish experience and the Jewish tradition, the Jewishness of the states of Israel, and really is pure power play.
Addressing participants at the annual conference of the Attorney General's office in Eilat last night, President Reuven Rivlin attacked the move, questioning the need for such a bill when Israel's declaration of independence in 1948 already proclaims Israel a Jewish state and defines its democratic and Jewish nature. The atmosphere surrounding the controversial bill also appears to have impacted Israel's cultural scene. Singer Amir Benayoun appeared to have taken the freedom of expression a step too far after posting a song titled Ahmad Loves Israel on his Facebook page, provoking a flood of criticism and media storm. The song describes an Arab student in Jerusalem who purportedly represents Arab citizens in Israel and longs for the day he can kill Jews. The song prompted Rivlin to cancel the singer's performance at an event commemorating the expulsion and exile of Jews from Arab lands, scheduled to take place at the president's residence later this month. A statement issued by Rivlin's office, while recognizing Benayoun as an exceptional artist, noted at times of tension and conflict, even if uttered in frustration and pain, the words are inconsistent with the responsibility required by the president's residence and all institutions with influence on public discourse. Israel prides itself in being the only democracy in the Middle East. The events of recent days threatens to turn the country into a state where equality and freedom of expression are no longer a given. Margot Dudkevich, IBA News.
The Minister of Interior, Gilad Erdan, today stripped the residency rights and all social benefits of Nadia Abu Jamal, the wife of one of the terrorists involved in the Har Nof synagogue massacre. Last night, thousands of people attended a memorial service to mark the end of the Shiva, 7-day mourning period, for 4 rabbis killed by terrorists in the Har Nof synagogue massacre. Among those participating in the service at the B'nai Torah synagogue were the widowers of the murdered men, family members, community rabbis, and people from all across the country. The 5th victim of the attack was a Druze Israeli police officer killed outside of the synagogue in a shootout with one of the gunmen. Rebbetzin Bashi Twersky, who lost her husband, Rabbi Moshe Twersky, in the massacre, delivered a message to the community calling for unity, love, and learning. Construction worker Netanel Arami was the victim of an Arab terror attack. The Petah Tikva Magistrates Court today lifted a gag order revealing that his death in September was a nationalistically motivated act of murder by one or more of the Arab workers at the building site, where 26-year-old Arami plunged to his death after his ropes were cut as he rappelled from the 11th floor. The Arami family led a campaign including public demonstrations to make details of the investigation public. Following the incident, police arrested and later released 3 Arab suspects. It was also revealed that the Arami family has been given a document confirming that they have been recognized as the family of a victim of terror. The Israeli company Al-Minda announced that following U.S. FDA clearance, its unique brain analysis system, BNA, will begin operation next year in 6 markets around the USA. For the first time ever, healthcare specialists will have a tool to accurately assess a patient's damaged brain functionality and compare it with the normative activity of healthy brains. The announcement was welcomed by several national sports organizations that are facing expensive lawsuits filed by injured sportsmen relating to concussions. We get more on this report from IBA's Dennis Zinn.
Football heroes crushed by the violence of the sport they love. Household names like Brett Favre, Junior Seau, Jim McMahon, and today an even younger victim of head trauma, 32-year-old former Super Bowl tight end Ben Utecht.
Head injuries from contact sports are a great cause of concern in the United States, especially in high-energy games such as tackle football and ice hockey. Each year, over 4 million new cases are reported. Major sports bodies, and especially the NFL and the NCAA, are embroiled in lawsuits filed by athletes and their families for concussion-related claims that could total over $1 billion. A major part of the problem is that until recently, medical professionals had no way of precisely measuring the harm caused by a blow to the head, and often eager sportsmen returned to play prematurely, sometimes immediately, further enhancing the injury. But now, that is all set to change thanks to a new revolutionary non-invasive monitoring system which can accurately analyze and quantify a patient's brain function.
Managing concussion is difficult because we can't see the injury itself. We can do a physical examination and see signs of brain dysfunction perhaps. Sometimes we get descriptions of symptoms from the patients themselves. But it's also quite possible that somebody can be injured and not really have a clinical effect. And so to have a tool that measures the injury itself and not just the symptoms or just the signs you see on examination is incredibly powerful.
The system called BNA, or Brain Network Activation, was developed by the Israeli company Al-Minda, based in Herzliya.
The challenge is that our brain is composed of 100 billion of neurons that are connected between them with 1 trillion connections. So every second that we speak, that we perform tasks, there are hundreds of neuronal firing that are generating our function. There is no good way to measure that. So that's the area that we concentrate, to measure neuronal firing and measure those network of neuronal activity that is underlying the brain function, which is sort of the software of the brain as compared to the hardware of the brain.
A sensor-laden net is placed on the patient's head. It scans the brain and measures cranial activity, providing precise insight into brain functionality and enabling the doctor to make the right back-to-play decision.
You have a Google map out and you're looking to go from one place to the next and the highways are all green, right? Information is flowing great. Well, a concussion is what happens basically when there's a traffic jam, and the highways are now all yellow and red, and you can't get around. BNA is actually measuring that concept and allows us to get a sense as to how injured the brain is and how well it's functioning.
BNA was recently approved for use in the United States by the Food and Drug Administration, the FDA. And according to Alminder CEO Ronen Gadot, the scope of applications presented by the BNA platform is enormous.
Since we're assessing how the brain is functioning, and we're learning along the way, and we're generating databases, what does it mean, this function of the brain? What happens in our brain when disease is progressing? What happens in our brain when we take specific medication, how it affects the brain? So we have research in a variety of areas. For example, neurodevelopmental disorders like ADHD, like autism, even dyslexia, brain injuries like concussions, like strokes, like traumatic brain injuries, neurological disorders like epilepsy, multiple sclerosis, psychiatric disorders like depression and schizophrenia, and also neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's.
It's no wonder then that Alminder was on the agenda of US President Barack Obama during his 2013 visit to Israel. After reviewing the BNA system and meeting its developers, he told Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu that he was highly impressed by what he saw, saying humorously, "These guys must have more brains than both of us put together." Dennis Zinn, IBA News.
Turning to sports in the NBA, where Israel's player Omri Caspi had one of the best games in his career. In front of a sellout crowd at the Smoothie King Center in New Orleans, Caspi was in the starting lineup, leading the Sacramento Kings to a 99-89 win. The small forward replaced Rudy Gay and stepped in to score his season-high 22 points on 9 of 14 shooting. The New Orleans Pelicans may have felt some extra pain knowing that they released Caspi from contract over the summer. This is how an American broadcaster spoke about our rep in the NBA.
Comes Caspi, he'll go right at and challenge Davis. Oh, how about that? Using his body to shield the defender. Beautiful job by Omri Caspi. 50 left. Caspi, here's the steal. Omri Caspi, what a game he's having. And Sacramento, just like that, leads by 11. And it's quiet here in New Orleans.
In entertainment news, the 11th International Jazz Globus Festival opens tonight in Jerusalem. 15 ensembles will perform in 5 evening concerts and 1 morning concert. The Festival of Jazz and Alternative Music has made a name for itself in the international jazz scene, and this year you can watch homegrown talent alongside prominent guests from abroad. Among the participants is famous American singer Kathy Cousins, who we are watching now. Cousins will be opening the musical extravaganza tonight at the Jerusalem Cultural Center's Harmony Hall. That's the Globus Jazz Festival in the capital until December 2nd.
Another kiss and love, and then I hope I'll never ever love another kiss and love, and then I hope I'll never ever love another kiss and love.
Taking a look at local finance and the shekel weekend in foreign currency trading, while share prices on the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange were up. Here's a look at the late afternoon numbers. The fierce weather conditions are expected to calm down somewhat tomorrow with occasional rain showers. Temperatures will remain colder than normal for this time of the year. They're the highs and lows for the next 24 hours at home and abroad. And that's all for this newscast. Please join us again tomorrow at the same time when Aaron Viner will be here with all the latest news from Israel and abroad. We leave you with pictures of the rainfall across the country. I'm Laura Cornfield wishing you a great evening and shalom from Jerusalem.